Now, we all have our own ways of dealing with life's challenges. For people of faith, the belief in God or a higher power can often help them to navigate the highs and lows of what life throws at them. In Journey of Faith, we hear from people from all kinds of religious and cultural backgrounds about those moments in their life when their faith has helped to sustain them and about the peaks and troughs along the way. Malik Fraz Ahmad, or Fraz as he's known, is a practising Muslim from Bradford, although he's currently in his final year studying law at Durham University. Fraz grew up in Bradford and he was born in Pakistan. I began by asking him how long he'd lived there and whether he had any memories of the country.
So I was only in Pakistan for the first couple of years of my life, and actually it's funny because at times the memories are mixed in with older videos and recordings that I've seen of myself on camcorders. But certainly I do remember I have some memories of weddings of relatives. But I was only about 2.5 when I came here. I went back briefly when I was 4 and 5, but after that I stayed here until a couple of years ago.
And your parents are members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. It's a religious minority in Pakistan. How is the community perceived there?
Yes, absolutely. As are myself and my siblings. So as a child, the reason my family moved to the UK was to claim asylum here, because in Pakistan, unfortunately, for being members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we face severe and systemic persecution. We are legally and constitutionally barred from referring to ourselves as Muslims, which makes it difficult to practice our faith openly, and that's under threat of life imprisonment and a fine. So my parents moved to this country so that their children, me and my siblings, would not have to endure the same persecutions and restrictions on religious freedom that they had faced for several years.
And the day-to-day of life there for them, obviously you're too young to remember it, but what have they told you about what it was like just to try and sort of go about your daily life, go to the shops, talk to neighbours? Was it a constant issue? Were they being reminded of their position, I suppose, in the country all the time? What have they told you?
It absolutely is. I mean, even when there are high concentrations of Ahmadi Muslims in one area, you'd think there are safety in numbers. But that's not the case, unfortunately. I mean, we had neighbours, relatives who were shot at, attacked, and just merely for being Ahmadi Muslims. I mean, it's a sad thing that when my grandmother came to this country a few years ago, it was the first time in I think 40 or 50 years that she'd been to a mosque, and it was a very emotional moment for her because, of course, women and children are not, it's not safe for them to go to the mosque in Pakistan, and you can't openly profess your faith at all, as it's legally and constitutionally you have no recourse in the law.
Parents often, don't they, protect their children from certain sort of concepts and themes when they are younger. And I wonder, given that you didn't have much memory of your life in Pakistan, when you were brought to the UK and you were growing up in Bradford, what conversations, if any, were had then when you were a child? How aware were you of the reasons that you were no longer in Pakistan and you were here in the UK?
My parents made sure from an early age to make us aware of this. I mean, it was, certainly, I was a curious child and thinking, why am I in this country where I have no immediate relatives, no cousins, no aunties, no uncles, when the rest of my family is in Pakistan? I was thinking there were questions that were raised, so my parents had to answer them. And I was acutely aware of it, I would say. And in fact, my parents imposed upon me the responsibility to fully embrace the opportunities and the freedoms that they had worked so hard to secure for us in this country. So as a young boy, I was sent to a Catholic primary school where I attended church regularly. I attended a non-denominational secondary school. I was taken to gurdwaras, to temples, to mosques, and to synagogues to learn about other religions and to see the universal values that are shared by different religions. My parents thought that was very important.
And what did you gain from learning from other religions? Because it's one thing for your parents to say, well, this is what you need to do. And it's another thing to actually, as a child, get something out of it. Were you aware of what you were getting from that experience, that multi-denominational experience?
I think so, definitely. I think maybe not at the time, but as I grew older, I definitely appreciated it more and more because my parents were wary of me just merely inheriting my religion. Religion's a deeply personal thing, and I think you have to learn about it and not merely inherit it. So my faith definitely gave me both the incentive and the motivation to integrate into the British culture and indeed even a language that was so different from my own. So I think the universal values shared by different religions, those of justice, of compassion, of respecting everyone else's individual beliefs, that they clearly aligned with the teachings of Islam. And I think I saw that in different settings.
And have you ever in this country felt any, I suppose, animosity from other members of the Muslim community, given that the Ahmadiyya community is a minority within the Muslim community in the UK?
On the large part, but for the most part, I haven't, no. And I think one of the, and this is something which of course, I'm biased given that I am studying law, but I think it's something which is a great attribute of the law, that when we are legally protected in this country, where we have freedom of religion, of expression, of speech for every single person, for all minorities in this country, it's very hard for someone, or indeed it's very hard for a majority of the population to question you. So in this country, I definitely feel a lot safer. And of course, there are pockets of opposition, as there are to anything. And of course, there can be disagreements, secular discussions, but without the violence and the hate speech, never mind physical assault, that Ahmadi Muslims have to suffer in Pakistan.
And in terms of your relation to Pakistan, you mentioned that you've still got relatives there. Do you feel a longing for that country? Would you like to be able to go to Pakistan and without any concerns about your safety? Is it a place that you think of often?
Absolutely. I think being wherever one is born, their birthplace, you have a particular affinity and affection for that country. And of course, growing up in that culture as well, through my parents as well. I still speak the language. I'm still very much immersed in that culture. So I want to go, and the positive impacts, the positive aspects of that culture, I really want to appreciate and to pass on to future generations as well. But I think it's a shame that when a society has these basic fundamental human rights are not afforded to all citizens equally, it's difficult then for a society to prosper. And I hope sooner rather than later, the Pakistan, people in Pakistan can realize that.
And you mentioned you're studying law at university. Was your sort of prior experience that looking into other religions and that appreciation of religious freedom in this country, did that form part of your decision making when you were going, right, what am I going to do with my life?
Yes, absolutely. Studying law, like I said before, religion, Islam teaches, is a deeply personal matter, and freedom of religion is expressed very clearly in Quranic teachings. It says there is no compulsion in religion, and the fact that everyone has the right to their own beliefs and they have the fundamental rights of all should be protected is a fundamental principle of Islam, and it's the same thing in law as well. So working within courts, I've seen firsthand how legal systems can either profoundly protect or deny fundamental rights. And going to university, pursuing a career in law and wanting to study law, I wanted to contribute to a society where justice and inclusivity prevail.
Your faith was especially important to you in the aftermath of the Southport attacks last July, when 3 young girls were killed and others were injured at a Taylor Swift themed dance class. Where were you when you heard about the attack?
I was working a summer job. In fact, I was in a school, and so I was physically quite distant. I was in the south. I was in Surrey, so I was physically quite distant from where the attacks were sort of happening, and especially from my hometown. So actually, that sort of increased the fear. I was on the phone every day asking my parents, is everything fine? And I remember the sad news. I'll never forget the moment when I saw the sad news, and it popped up on BBC News that the Hartlepool Mosque there was an attempted attack on it. And I clicked on the screen and I saw that this was the same Hartlepool Mosque which I attended regularly while at university, and it had been targeted by violent protesters. And it was spread by that misinformation about the perpetrator being a Muslim asylum seeker who had secretly entered the country. And I think it was frightening that the ease with which parts of society accepted this simplistic and dangerous story of Muslims as a supposed threat. And I think it was made even louder by the constant noise of social media. And that just unleashed a flood of xenophobic, Islamophobic feelings across social media, which was, as me, someone who wasn't on the ground, merely looking at it through Twitter or through other social media platforms, was very scary.
I'm interested in sort of exploring that, because when we first started our interview, you talked about that the enjoying of the religious freedoms that you experienced here in the UK compared to what your parents had experienced back in Pakistan, and then you're an adult and you're experiencing. I mean, was this the first time where you had felt this sort of this kind of tension, this fear in terms of your status as a Muslim in this country? Was it the first experience for you, or had it happened previously?
I think it definitely was the first major event. I'd heard about, riots previously that had happened, or unrest that had happened previously, but when you read about it in textbooks or on previous, archived news articles, it's not the same as experiencing it on the ground. So perhaps it feels greater than it is. But I think the fact that, these attempted acts of vandalism, they weren't just physical damage. It symbolized an attack on those sanctuaries where, as Muslims, we connect with our faith, our community, and these are, mosques are the spaces where we seek support and find solace. So these attacks were profoundly unsettling, and the fear and the emotional toll that ripped through the community was palpable. And I think even, as an Ahmadi Muslim, you touched upon this, but I think this surge of hatred was especially personal and painful. Because, as I said, our communities has long suffered persecution abroad. So perhaps better than most, I could understand the devastating human cost of religious intolerance, which is a poisonous ideology. And I think, to do that, we've got to recognize the dangers of allowing fear and ignorance to control public discussions rather than the facts and the real truth.
And I wonder how you come to sort of terms, I suppose, with these kind of feelings and how you process it, because you've talked in a very kind of intellectual way about this and sort of referring to the power of law and all of those kind of things. But I wonder how, when you go back to your faith and to God, how you process these kinds of events. How do you sort of lean on your faith in those moments?
Well, look, my faith reminds me constantly to respond not with despair or discontent, but even in the midst of darkness to be, I suppose, those small rays of hope which stubbornly shine through. I mean, the Holy Quran says, repel evil with that which is best. So I think even, you're right. There is times where I felt, heartbroken, or at times it felt as if, I'd always believed in the UK's values of justice, inclusivity, freedom of religion. But in that moment, it felt as though the country where my family had claimed asylum was suddenly less welcoming. And, we had before that prominent public figures questioning the loyalty of young British Muslims. So it certainly felt like my identity was increasingly under siege.
And you wanted to do something actually very practical about this, didn't you? Because you ended up writing some articles for newspapers to basically put a counter-narrative out there.
Absolutely. And I said, I wrote several pieces in these newspapers and received a lot of feedback from people who said it reflected the same position that they had, explaining that it was unjust to malign an entire religion, an entire community based on the actions of a few. But I think, apart from just, writing as well, our religion teaches to have positive actions as well, to have practical implementations of this. So alongside other young British Muslims, we doubled down on our efforts to serve humanity and serve the citizens of the country. So I remember even during the festive period, we organised visits to care homes, donated to food banks, participated in litter picking initiatives. And these actions were driven by that belief that small acts of kindness, these are the things which counteract fear and prejudice. And its practical examples, through our practical example, we show the true peaceful teachings of Islam.
I wonder how you've been reacting to sort of recent discussions about around the kind of fear of talking about things and race and how that might impact and be part of certain events. I'm talking about the kind of grooming scandal now. That kind of fear of talking about reality versus that fear of pointing at a particular community and whipping up racial hatred. And I wonder if how you have been watching the news and hearing these discussions recently, how you've been processing that.
It's undeniable that we've got to, going forward, tackle head on with unwavering determination this harmful influence of false information, of hate speech, particularly on social media platforms, like you mentioned, which I think in far too many cases have now become breeding grounds for extremism of all kinds. And often there is not an ounce, a jot, a scintilla of truth to the charges levelled against Islam. So we must challenge these tropes which are bandied around with abandon by opportunistic politicians, agitators who shamelessly exploit people's legitimate worries. But if you would allow me, I'm really keen to finish on a note of positivity and optimism, because I absolutely and still believe in the decency and integrity of the vast majority of the British public to see through these divisive narratives. I mean, it's not just, thoughts either. In practical examples, in Southport, we saw how the community came together to selflessly clean up the mess and the damage left behind by rioters. In fact, in Hartlepool, like I mentioned, the attack earlier, a GoFundMe set up by the local Hartlepudlian that raised over £13,000, appreciating the mosque, which they had seen over the past year had donated tens of thousands of meals to the church, the church's food bank opposite, and they knew practically how much of a positive impact that mosque had in its region. So I think the Ahmadi Muslim community, we have a motto which is love for all and hatred for none. And I think that has never been more relevant, more necessary, or more urgently needed. And I would stress, it's not just a motto, it's not even a saying or a slogan. For us, it's a clear call to action. It's how we live our lives. We believe it and we practice it. So in today's age, it's a timely reminder that in the face of hatred, we must respond with love. In the face of unfamiliarity, we've got to respond with awareness. And in the face of division, the only response is unity.
Fraz, really, really good to talk to you and hear your journey of faith. Malik Fraz Ahmad from Bradford sharing his journey of faith story with